I never used to be the kind of guy who got scared easily. Not of the dark, not of wild animals, not of the sounds that echoed through a forest at night. I was 33 when this happened, and I'd been camping solo for over a decade. I always felt at ease outdoors, away from the noise and mess of city life. But the one time I decided to head deep into Arizona's high desert alone, everything changed. It was 2019, mid-October, the kind of dry, crisp air that makes your skin feel tight, but the sky looks sharper than usual. I took a week off work, packed up my 2003 Tacoma, and headed northwest out of Phoenix, past Prescott, and into the foothills near Chino Valley. I wanted elevation, open sky, cold nights, the kind of place where you could walk for hours and not see another person. I found it off a rough forestry road, about 45 minutes down a rock-strewn path that looked like it hadn't seen a grader in years. No cell service, no signage, not even cattle fences. Just scattered junipers, tall grass, dry washes, and silence. The first night went fine. I set up my canvas tent, something I'd invested in that summer, made a small fire, and grilled a couple burgers on the grate I kept in the back of the truck. It got cold fast after sundown, and by 8:30, I was zipped up in my sleeping bag listening to the slight wind roll through the scrub. I heard some coyotes in the distance around midnight, but that's common in Arizona. Their yipping and howling is just background noise out here. The second day, I hiked the surrounding ridges, took some photos of old, crumbling fence posts, animal tracks, even spotted some mule deer further off in a dry wash. Nothing unusual, just beautiful emptiness. I made another small fire that night, no bigger than necessary. When you camp alone, especially out in dry country, you stay cautious. Sparks can travel fast. Before I turned in, I pissed off into the brush and looked up at the stars for a while. It was one of those nights where you could see the curve of the Milky Way stretching across the sky. I felt good, but things got strange the next day. Started small. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed a smell. Not overwhelming, just off. It wasn't the usual dry earth, juniper dust scent that you come to expect out here. It was faintly metallic, a little sour, almost like wet dog fur left in the sun too long, mixed with iron. I checked around my camp, looked for scat, maybe a dead animal nearby. Nothing. The breeze was light, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from. But it stayed for most of the day, just hanging there. That night, I didn't make a fire. I didn't want to attract anything. Call it a gut feeling. I cooked with my propane stove behind the tailgate and sat in the truck bed as the sun dropped behind the hills. By now, the quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. Felt loaded, like something was holding its breath. The noises started around midnight. Not close, maybe a couple 100 yards off. Heavy steps, not in rhythm like a deer or elk. Not skittering like javelina or bobcat. These steps sounded awkward, almost like a man trying to walk on all fours but not built for it. I stayed perfectly still in my sleeping bag, listening. Then silence again. Then a single thump, like something large had dropped out of a tree. Then more silence. I didn't sleep. By morning, I convinced myself it was probably a bear. Black bears still roam some parts of the state, though they're shy and rarely aggressive. I grabbed my .357 from the glove box and strapped it to my hip before I even started coffee. I hiked in a wide circle around camp, looking for tracks or droppings. I found neither, just some broken branches in a small juniper stand east of camp, like something big had forced its way through. But the ground was dry and didn't hold prints well. I shook it off. That afternoon, I sat under the tarp I'd strung between two poles to get shade. I kept hearing a clicking noise, very faint, inconsistent. Sometimes just a single click, sometimes two, like two small rocks tapping together. I got up and walked in slow spirals outward from camp, trying to locate it. But every time I thought I had a direction, it stopped. And when I gave up and returned, I'd hear it again. Click, pause, click, 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 like something playing with stones. That sour smell had returned too, slightly stronger now. That evening, I made no fire again. Ate quickly and got in the tent early. I left the pistol unholstered and kept my boots on, just in case. I zipped the tent door tight, even though I normally left it cracked for airflow. It was colder that night, down into the 30s, but I wasn't gonna risk it. The wind picked up around 2 a.m., and I heard something that chilled me worse than the air ever could. It sounded like someone trying to copy coyote howls, but not doing it right. Too slow, too long, like someone had heard a pack before but didn't really understand how it worked. The voice was wrong, too deep. There was no rhythm, just one stretched out sound followed by another, like a drunk man playing a broken recording of a coyote on a bad speaker. Then, footsteps. Again. Only this time they circled the tent. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, hand on the pistol, eyes wide open, listening to the dirt crunch and shift as it moved. It walked halfway around, then paused. I didn't hear anything for a full minute. Then I heard a light dragging sound across the tent fabric, like fingertips or claws. I didn't sleep at all. When the first light showed on the horizon, I waited until it was bright enough to see clearly. Then I burst out of the tent, weapon drawn, expecting to face down a bear or worse. But there was nothing, just the open hills, rocks, brush, and silence. Except there were tracks, but not normal ones. Not boots, not hooves, not paws. They looked like elongated human feet, but with the toes spread out unnaturally wide. Some were smeared, like whatever it was didn't always walk upright. Some prints showed knees or knuckles dragging in the dust. I followed them about 30 feet before they vanished on a patch of hard rock. The smell was thick now, like something rotten and unwashed, a musky, oily stench that got caught in the back of my throat. That was when I decided to leave. I packed everything in a hurry, not even rolling my gear up properly. I threw it all into the truck bed, slammed the tailgate shut, and peeled out onto the rocky road. I didn't stop, not even to check the map. I just drove until I hit pavement and kept going. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't want to. That should have been the end of it. But about a week later, when I was back home in Tucson, something happened. I was going through my SD card, cleaning up the photos I'd taken out there. Mostly wide shots of the horizon, dry washes, deer tracks, that kind of thing. I clicked through about 60 of them before stopping on one that I didn't remember taking. It was a photo of my camp, my truck in the background, the tarp strung up, my chair, my stove. But in the left side of the frame, partially behind a bush, there was a figure. It looked human, but not quite. It was crouched low, almost squatting, with arms longer than they should have been. The skin was grayish, not clothing skin. No hair.
No gear. No shoes.
Just long limbs and a bent, contorted shape. The head was tilted too far to the side, almost upside down, like it was trying to listen or look closer. I stared at that photo for what felt like an hour. I checked the metadata. It was taken on the afternoon of the second day, when I'd gone to hike that ridge. That meant whatever it was had been near my camp while I was gone. I deleted the photo. I never showed it to anyone. I don't go camping alone anymore. I haven't even left the state since then. Sometimes I still smell it though. That same sour, metallic stink. I'll be walking through a parking lot or sitting in my backyard, and for just a moment, it hits me, faint, almost like it's remembering me too. I don't care if people believe in skinwalkers or not. I didn't, not really. I thought those were old stories, just Navajo legends or myths told to scare kids. But after that trip, I don't care what they call it. Skinwalker, shapeshifter, predator, whatever it was real. It was watching me, and it wanted me to know. I got out before it decided to do more than just watch. And I won't make that mistake again. My name's David Riley. I'm 42 now, but this happened back in the summer of 2013, when I was 30. At the time, I was living in Pennsylvania near Scranton. I worked in construction and usually had my weekends free unless a job was behind schedule. That summer, the company had a few big projects going on, but I managed to get 3 days off in a row, Friday through Sunday. I didn't want to waste them sitting around. I needed to get out, breathe, reset. So I packed up my old hiking bag and decided to drive north toward Tyogga State Forest. I'd only been there once before with a friend, and I remembered the woods being quiet and the trails mostly empty if you veered off the popular ones. My plan was to hike out on a lesser-used trail, set up camp near one of the backcountry clearings, and just spend 2 nights alone, no phone, no traffic, no other voices. It was mid-July, hot during the day, cool at night. The forecast showed nothing but sun for the whole weekend, and I felt good. I left early Friday morning, got to the trailhead before lunch, and started hiking in. I brought plenty of food and water, my usual gear, and some bear spray just in case. I wasn't expecting anything dangerous. I'd camped alone plenty of times before and had a healthy respect for the woods. The trail I picked was a narrow one, not even marked on most maps, just an old hunting path that cut away from the main trails. I followed it for about 3.5 hours, deeper into the forest. I passed one old fire ring that looked like it hadn't been used in years, and after a bit more walking, I found a decent spot near a dry creek bed. The ground was soft but level, and there was enough open space to see around in every direction.
No weird feelings.
Nothing that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I set up camp. I had a small one-man tent, cooked up a simple meal on my camping stove, and sat back in my folding chair as the sun started going down. It was peaceful, dead quiet except for a few birds and the occasional rustle in the brush from rabbits or whatever else was out there. I wasn't nervous. I didn't feel watched. It was the kind of silence that makes you remember how loud life is the rest of the time. I fell asleep fast that night. No issues, no animals sniffing around, no sounds of branches breaking. It was around 4 a.m. when I woke up the first time. Not to a sound, but to a feeling, a tension in my body. I remember lying there with my eyes open, staring at the roof of the tent, not really sure why I was awake. I figured maybe it was just that my back hurt or that I had to pee. I waited a bit, listening. Still nothing. The woods were dead quiet. Eventually, I unzipped the tent, stepped out, and did my business about 30 feet away, behind a big tree. I scanned around with my flashlight but didn't see anything odd. When I got back in, I left the flap halfway open for ventilation. That's when I caught a whiff of something. Not strong, not like a skunk or trash, just a faint odor, like wet dog mixed with something metallic. I told myself it was probably just the wind kicking something up. I fell back asleep. The next morning, I woke up around 7:30. I made some instant coffee and oatmeal and sat out by the edge of the tree line where the forest started to thicken. I noticed what looked like an old boot print near the dry creek. That was strange, but I figured it could have been mine from the night before, even if it was in a weird spot. I didn't think much of it. I spent the day hiking around in circles with my compass, marking trees with orange tape so I wouldn't get turned around. Nothing weird happened. I heard some deer off in the distance and found a shaded area where I took a nap on a flat rock for maybe 20 minutes. When I got back to camp around 3 p.m., everything was just how I left it. No disturbance. That night, though, things shifted. It was after 9 p.m. and dark. I'd eaten and was about to settle into my tent when I heard something. Not close, just out in the distance. It sounded like someone walking, slowly, through the brush, one step at a time. Not like an animal. Too methodical, too heavy. It would stop for a while, then start again, then stop. I stood there in the dark, holding my flashlight, pointing it in the direction of the sound, but I didn't see anything. I wasn't even scared yet, just on alert. I shouted out, not words, just a loud grunt or two, like people do sometimes to scare off bears. I did it a couple more times, then clapped loud. The steps stopped. I stood there waiting. Then I went back into the tent. I kept my flashlight right next to me. Took me a long time to fall asleep. Sometime after midnight, I heard it again. Just 1 or 2 footsteps. Close this time, right near the edge of camp. Not circling, just standing. My mouth got dry and my heartbeat got slow and heavy in my chest. I didn't move. I just lay there, breathing through my nose, eyes wide open. I never heard it walk away. I must have passed out eventually, maybe from exhaustion. But when I woke up, everything was normal. Nothing missing. No prints. The only thing was the air. It smelled faintly like old pennies and wet fur again. Same smell as before, but just a little stronger now. I made up my mind to pack up and head back. I didn't want to spend another night out there. I told myself it could have just been a deer or an old animal wandering. But the idea of sleeping again, not knowing, made my stomach twist. I started packing fast, not eating anything. As I stuffed my sleeping bag, I heard something crunch about 40 feet off. I froze, staring into the trees. I didn't see anything, but the smell hit again. This time it was strong. Strong enough to make me gag. The hair on my arms and neck rose. I turned, grabbed my pack, and started moving back the way I came. I didn't take breaks. I pushed through the heat, retracing my marked trees. At one point I realized I had gone slightly off the trail and ended up in a part of the woods I didn't recognize. That shook me. I sat down, trying to gather myself, but then I heard it again. Movement behind me, just one step, then another, deliberate, slow, heavy. I got up and walked fast, making my way toward what I hoped was the original trail. I didn't stop for hours. My legs were cramping, my back ached, but I pushed on. By early evening, I made it to a part of the trail I recognized. Felt like relief was in reach. I kept moving. That's when I saw something that made me stop cold. Off the trail, maybe 20 feet into the trees, was a small camp. Not like mine, just a crude lean-to made of sticks and a torn blue tarp. There was a pile of bones next to it. Could have been deer, could have been something else. Hard to tell, but they were stacked, not scattered, deliberately stacked in a neat pyramid. Next to the bones was an old, rusted cooking pot, and something that looked like a jacket, maybe army surplus, laid out on a flat rock like it had just been dried. I didn't go closer. I backed away, got back on the trail, and moved fast. I don't know if whoever made that camp was still around. I don't know if that was who was following me, but the pieces started fitting together, and I knew deep down that someone was out there. Not an animal, not a random hiker, someone who didn't want to be found. Someone who lived out there long enough to blend in. Someone who was watching me. I didn't stop again until I reached the main parking area just before sunset. My car was the only one there. I got in, locked the doors, and sat still for a long time. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, more from the adrenaline wearing off. I didn't report it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't take pictures or GPS coordinates. I just drove home. It was like I didn't want any part of it to follow me back. Like talking about it would make it real again. It's been over a decade now, and I've never camped alone again. Not once. I still hike sometimes, and I'll go out with friends if we're near a populated site. But that trip changed me. The forest stopped feeling like peace and started feeling like a place that hides things. The worst part? A few months later, I saw a story in a local paper. Just a short mention. Some park volunteers found a campsite deep in Tyogga State Forest. Same area, same kind of tarp shelter, They said it looked like someone had been living out there for a long time, years maybe. Nobody was around when they found it, just a pile of bones. They thought it might have been a pet, but they weren't sure, and they found clothes, some with blood, no ID, no missing persons matched, nothing to tie it together, and that smell, metal and wet fur. It never left my memory. I think about that stack of bones, that crude shelter, and those footsteps in the night. I try to forget, but I can't, because it wasn't a story. It wasn't a ghost or some monster from a campfire tale. It was real, and I was lucky to get out. I was 31 when it happened. It was late September 2013, the kind of damp, cold month where the sun starts giving up early in the day. I was living just outside Leeds back then, working a dull logistics job I didn't care for. That year had been rough. I'd gone through a breakup in spring. My younger brother had moved to Australia, and my job felt like it was eating away my time. I wasn't depressed, but I was worn out. I just needed a reset. I'd grown up hiking and camping with my dad and older cousins. I wasn't some survival expert, but I knew enough to stay warm, dry, and alive in the woods. So, when that Thursday rolled around and I realized I had a long weekend with nothing planned, I thought a solo camping trip would be the best way to clear my head. Just me, a tent, the trees, and silence. I didn't want to go to any of the usual places. Too many tourists, too many kids screaming at campsites or people blaring music from Bluetooth speakers. I wanted silence. I started scrolling forums and old threads on camping message boards, and eventually came across a guy who'd mentioned a quiet spot in Northumberland. Said it was off the old logging trail past Kielder Water, not part of the maintained sites. He said you'd have to hike 2 hours up a barely there trail into a forested ridge, and once you got there, it was just trees, rain, and peace. That sounded perfect. Friday morning, I packed my gear, a green one-man tent, a thick sleeping bag, a butane stove, dried food, instant coffee, a flashlight, backup batteries, and the usual survival kit. I loaded up my backpack, threw it in the boot of my old VW Golf, and drove the 4 hours north. It was already drizzling by the time I got past Hexham, and by the time I reached the gravel trail off the main road, it was full-on raining. Not heavy, but steady and cold. The kind of rain that works its way into your sleeves and socks slowly and stays there. I parked at the edge of a muddy trailhead. There were no signs, just old tire ruts and fallen branches. I double-checked my pack, put on my rain shell, and started hiking. The trees got thicker quickly. It wasn't a maintained path. It was more like walking where an animal trail used to be. The land sloped upward for most of it, and the rain made everything slick. My boots slid a few times, and once I went down on my knee in the mud. It took me nearly 3 hours to get to the ridge. Longer than I expected. When I finally reached the clearing, it was close to 5 p.m. and already going dim. The spot was perfect though. A flat patch between two slopes, surrounded by thick evergreens. No wind reached the spot, and it had natural runoff for rain. I could hear a stream somewhere downhill, but not close enough to be annoying. I pitched my tent quickly, got inside, and lit my small stove to boil water. The tent was dry. The inside of my boots wasn't. I peeled off my wet socks and sat in silence as the water hissed and steamed. I didn't have a signal up there. No GPS, no mobile. Just trees and fog. It was peaceful. For the first few hours, anyway. I ate a hot pouch of curry and rice, then unrolled my sleeping bag and climbed in fully clothed. The rain tapped the tent constantly. Not loud, just there. Like someone tapping a finger on canvas over and over. I must have dozed off by 9 p.m. I woke up again, maybe around 1 or 2 a.m. Not sure what did it, but I was wide awake. My neck was sore, and my legs were stiff. The rain hadn't let up. It was heavier now, I could hear the water running off the tent sides and the occasional drip from the branches overhead. My bladder was full, so I unzipped the tent halfway and leaned out to take a leak into the grass. As I did, I froze. There was a noise, not from the rain, not the trees. It was movement, somewhere to my right. Not close, maybe 20 or 30 meters away, up the hill behind a thicket of firs. I held my breath, trying to listen over the rain. It was deliberate. A crack, then 2 slow steps, then silence. I waited, crouched in the doorway of the tent, hoping it was a deer, but it didn't move like one. No quick scurry.
No snapping twigs.
Just 2 careful steps and stillness. I zipped the tent quietly and backed inside. My heart was racing, but I tried to calm myself. Animals moved around at night. That's normal. And besides, no one else would be that far up, and if they were, they wouldn't be sneaking around. I lay back down, eyes wide, listening. For the next hour, there was nothing but rain. Eventually, I dozed off again. The next morning was worse. The rain hadn't stopped. It was a steady gray curtain coming down on everything. The inside of the tent stayed dry, but everything outside was soaked. My socks from the day before were cold and damp no matter how I tried to wring them. I changed into a dry pair, shoved the wet ones in a plastic bag, and brewed instant coffee under the tent's vestibule. While the water boiled, I took a walk around the site. That's when I found it. About 20 feet uphill, near the tree line where I'd heard the noise in the night, I saw footprints. They weren't mine. Too big, longer stride, and they were fresh. Not yesterday's, they hadn't filled with water yet. Someone had walked through there. Not just walked, stood. The prints near one of the trees were in place. Deep, as if someone had stood still for minutes. Watching. I didn't like that. I didn't like it at all. I packed my stove quickly and decided to hike down. I didn't want to spend another night there, but when I started heading back toward the trail I'd come up, I stopped. There was something wrong. The way I'd come up, the trail was blocked. A large branch, freshly broken. It had clearly been dragged across the trail, half wedged between 2 trees. Someone had moved it there. Not a storm. The branch was too fresh, too clean.
No rot, no weathering.
It had been snapped, not fallen. It made no sense. I pulled the branch aside, enough to squeeze through, and started walking fast, ignoring the rain. The trail seemed different now. Same general direction, but something felt off. I kept losing the path, kept circling around thicker brush than I remembered. I checked my compass, tried to orient south, but I couldn't see the sun through the clouds, and everything was wet and gray and confusing. Eventually, I gave up and turned back. I didn't want to get more lost than I already was. Back at camp, I sat under the tree canopy and tried to think. I hadn't seen a single soul since parking. My car was hours away. No signal, just forest. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe the branch had just fallen weird. Maybe the footprints were mine after all. I spent the rest of the day in the tent. The rain didn't stop. It got colder. The fog came down thick in the late afternoon and stayed. I couldn't see 10 feet past the trees. Everything felt smaller, tighter. At dusk, I boiled water for another bagged meal and sat eating in silence. My headlamp cast a dull glow against the tent walls. My eyes were tired, but my ears kept picking up little things. Cracks, rustles, tapping. Some of it was rain. Some of it wasn't. That night was worse than the first. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard something outside. A snap, a rustle. Once, something brushing against the tent. Just a little scrape like a boot dragging. I didn't move. I held my breath and didn't move for 10 minutes straight. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but I didn't. When morning came, I unzipped the tent slowly. My stomach dropped. The footprints were back. Same ones as before, only this time closer, circling. Someone had walked right up to my tent in the night, tightly, at least 2 full circles. I could see where the mud had been pressed down by a heavy foot. Then, nothing. The tracks vanished into the fog. I didn't eat. I didn't make coffee. I packed everything in under 15 minutes and started walking. I didn't care if I got wet or slipped. I was done. I headed down the hill, following my compass due south, aiming for the road. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I figured if I just went south, I'd hit the road eventually. But the woods didn't end. I walked for nearly 4 hours. My legs were shaking. My boots were soaked. The fog only got worse. At one point, I slipped and slid down a muddy slope, twisting my wrist when I caught myself. When I stood up, I saw it. Another set of footprints. Ahead of me, fresh. Whoever it was had gone the same way, and not far ahead. They were wide apart, like the person had been running. I didn't follow them. I turned hard left and kept walking. No trail.
No campes.
Just get out. Another 2 hours passed before I saw something man-made. An old wooden fence, half-rotted. Then a cabin. It was abandoned. A collapsed roof, blackened fireplace, vines swallowing the sides. But behind it, I saw a dirt road and tire tracks. I followed the road for an hour, then saw the main gravel logging road I'd driven on 2 days earlier. My car was still parked there, exactly where I'd left it. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there in silence for a long time before I turned the key. I drove straight home that night, soaked, cold, and shivering. I never reported anything. What would I say? That someone walked around my tent in the middle of the night? That they broke a branch and watched from the trees? But I know what I saw. I know someone was out there. A few months later, I found a news article while randomly looking up the area again. In 2008, a hiker went missing in that same forest ridge. Young guy solo trip, never found. Then another one, back in 1997. Police said they likely got lost. Maybe they did, but I think someone's still up there, waiting, watching, and I won't ever go back. I went camping in the spring of 2014. I remember the exact date because it was during the Easter weekend. I had taken a few extra days off from work, just a short break. My name's Kevin. I was 31 at the time, working in a small office near Brighton, doing admin for a building supply company. I didn't have much of a social life back then. My girlfriend and I had just broken up, and I was at that strange age where all your friends are either getting married or completely absorbed in their careers. So I thought I'd go out on my own and clear my head for a few days. I'd always liked the woods. I didn't grow up near any forests, but my dad used to take me hiking in the South Downs when I was younger. I liked the quiet, the slow sounds of nature, and not hearing cars or phones for a bit. So I decided to camp near Ashdown Forest in East Sussex. It's not the most remote place, but it's big enough to find proper solitude if you step far enough away from the walking trails. I planned to stay for 3 nights, maybe 4 if the weather held up. I packed light, just a one-man tent, a sleeping bag, some food, water, a gas stove, torch, a knife, and a few other basics. I drove up from Brighton early in the morning, left my car near one of the smaller lay-bys outside the main area, and hiked in. I didn't use any formal campsite. I wanted to wild camp where no one else would be around. It's not exactly legal in all parts of England, but as long as you're respectful and quiet, no one usually bothers you. By early afternoon, I had found a good spot. It was flat, dry, and surrounded by tall pines that blocked the wind. I was about an hour and a half's walk from the nearest road, and I hadn't seen a single person the entire hike in. I pitched my tent, boiled some water for tea, and just sat there with my back against a tree, enjoying the peace. That first day was uneventful. I heard a few deer moving in the underbrush and spotted a fox later in the evening. The stars came out around 9. It was cold, but I had a good sleeping bag. I went to sleep early. The second day started normally. I woke up just after 6, made coffee, and ate an oat bar. Then I walked around the area for a bit. I had a small map, not a GPS, but I wasn't planning to go far. Just wanted to stretch my legs and get a feel for the land. The forest was damp that morning. You could smell the earth and pine, and every now and then I'd hear something moving out of sight. Probably rabbits or maybe a badger. Still no people, no planes overhead either. Just wind in the trees. That's what I'd come for. It was around 4 in the afternoon when I saw something strange for the first time. I was gathering firewood about 20 minutes from my camp. I'd found a spot with lots of dry fallen branches and was stacking them in my arms when I noticed something off. I got this weird feeling, like I was being watched. That sounds cliché, but it was true. I froze and looked around. Everything seemed normal at first, just trees, brambles, and the low hum of insects. But then, about 30 or 40 meters away, I saw a man. He wasn't walking. He was just standing behind a tree only partially visible. At first, I thought maybe it was a hiker or another wild camper, but something about him felt wrong. He was too still, and he wasn't dressed like a camper or a walker.
No backpack, no doggy, no jacket.
Just a dark sweatshirt and jeans. His arms hung down loose, and I could only see part of his face. Pale, eyes a bit too wide, just standing there, half behind the trunk. I didn't know what to do. I raised my hand in an awkward wave, but he didn't move, didn't wave back, just kept looking. It made my skin crawl. I turned slowly and walked away, not running, but not wasting time either. I didn't look back until I was almost back at camp. When I finally turned, he was gone. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about that man. Who was he? What was he doing out there? There were no cars around, no camps, no trails even. And why just stand and stare? I told myself he was probably just some odd loner or maybe someone like me, just wanting peace and space. But still, something didn't feel right. The third day is when things started getting worse. I woke up to find one of my tent skylines had been cut. Not frayed, clean cut like with a blade. I hadn't heard anything during the night, no footsteps or rustling, but it unnerved me. I checked my gear. Nothing was missing, but the feeling of being watched was stronger now. I felt it every time I stepped away from the camp, like eyes on my back, low to the ground, waiting. I thought about leaving. I even packed most of my things, but part of me didn't want to let fear chase me off. I'd never had anxiety before, not like that, and I didn't want to feel like a coward. So I stayed one more night. I wish I hadn't. Around 11 that night, I was lying in the tent, trying to sleep, when I heard something. It wasn't a wild animal. It was footsteps, human, crunching leaves, slow and deliberate. Not like someone lost or walking through quickly. These steps paused, then moved again, stopped, then started, like someone circling the camp. I held my breath and listened. I didn't want to turn on the torch. I just lay there, still, gripping my small knife inside the sleeping bag. Then came the whisper. Not actual words, just the softest exhale of breath, like someone standing just outside the tent. I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped the bag, grabbed the torch, and burst out of the tent, shining the light into the trees. Nothing, just cold, foggy air and empty woods. My breath fogged up in the light beam. I turned in circles, scanning every direction, heart pounding so hard I thought I might collapse. Nothing moved. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat with my back against a tree, torch in one hand, knife in the other, waiting for the dawn. As soon as the sky began to lighten, I packed up everything and left. I didn't eat, didn't make tea, didn't even brush my teeth. I just walked as fast as I could back toward the lay-by. The air was still, heavy with that morning fog that hangs low to the ground in forests. Every crack of a twig sent a jolt through my spine. About halfway back, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. In the middle of the path, a narrow, muddy trail was a dead bird. A magpie, not just dead, but laid out neatly, wings spread, neck broken, eyes still open. Someone had placed it there. It wasn't killed by a fox or any animal. It had been arranged. Deliberate. I stepped around it and kept moving. When I got back to my car, I checked the doors. Still locked. I threw my pack in the back and drove off without looking back. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I didn't tell anyone the full story for a long time. People don't really believe that kind of thing unless it's dramatic. Ghosts, murderers, escaped convicts. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. There was a man in those woods and he was watching me. I don't know what he wanted or why he didn't approach. Maybe he was playing some kind of twisted game. Maybe he wanted to scare me. Maybe worse. I've thought about it a lot. I didn't report it to the police. What would I have said? A man watched me from the woods? It's not illegal to be creepy. There was no crime, technically. Just one of those moments in life where something brushes against you that shouldn't be there. Something you can't explain. I haven't been camping since. I still go on walks, stick to the South Downs now, open areas with people around. No more solo wild camping. No more thick woods. I still think about that man sometimes. That blank face behind the tree. The slow footsteps in the dark. The dead magpie laid out like a warning. Some people go into the woods to get away from people. But sometimes the scariest thing out there is not nature. It's people. Especially the ones who don't speak, don't move, just stand and watch you like they already know what's going to happen. And if I'd stayed one more night, I think something would have happened. Something real. Something final. I'm just glad I left when I did. I was 28 years old the summer I camped in a graveyard on the edge of a small town called Fairbridge in Oregon. It wasn't a dare or some drunken stunt. I wasn't trying to prove anything. The truth is, I needed a place to stay for the night, and that graveyard seemed like the safest and quietest spot I could find. I was driving through Oregon as part of a long solo trip. I'd quit my job back in California after 10 years working in a warehouse, packed what I could into my old blue pickup, and just started driving north. No plans, just the road, the radio, and the occasional cup of gas station coffee. I'd been sleeping in the truck for most of the trip, but after a week, it started wearing me down. My back hurt, my legs cramped up. I needed to stretch out for once. That evening, I pulled into Fairbridge just after 6 p.m. It was one of those small towns that felt like it had been forgotten by time. A few brick buildings, a diner, a post office, and one traffic light that blinked yellow in every direction. I remember the smell too. Pine trees and dry grass, thick in the air, with just a trace of smoke like someone burning wood in the distance. I drove around looking for a place to stay, but there were no motels. Just some houses with wide porches, some with rusted-out cars in the yard, others with little fences and wind chimes. I didn't want to knock on a stranger's door and ask to sleep on their lawn. So I kept driving until I saw a sign that said, Graveyard Hill, ST 1889. It was set up on a ridge on the north edge of town. I followed the gravel road up and parked near the gate. It wasn't a huge cemetery, maybe 50 or 60 headstones, spaced out across a sloping hill with dry weeds and patches of yellow grass. The fence was old iron, with a rusted gate hanging half open.
No lights. No cameras.
No signs saying to keep out. It wasn't spooky. It was just quiet. That's what I wanted. Quiet. A flat place to lay my sleeping bag, far from the noise of the road or anyone else. I walked around the place, checked for signs of recent visitors, but there weren't any. Just faded plastic flowers on a few graves, cracked stones, and old names like Eugene and Martha carved in them. The most recent grave I saw was from 1979. After that, nothing newer, like people just stopped being buried there. I picked a spot on the far side of the hill, near a big tree with a broken bench under it. It was far from the road, and the tree offered a bit of shelter. I rolled out my sleeping bag, sat on the bench for a while, and watched the sun drop behind the hills. It was peaceful, almost too quiet, in a way that made you feel like the world had stopped spinning. The light faded fast, and the shadows stretched long across the ground. I boiled some water on my little camp stove and made instant noodles, ate them slowly, listening to the wind rustle the tall grass.
No birds, no crickets.
Just wind. I finished eating, cleaned up, and lay back in the sleeping bag just as the stars started coming out. It was a clear night, no clouds. The kind of night where you can see every pinprick of light in the sky. I lay there a long time watching them, feeling the ground underneath me. It wasn't uncomfortable. The dirt was dry and warm, and the slope of the hill let me stretch my legs. I thought I'd fall asleep fast, but I didn't. It started with a sound, a sharp crack, like someone stepping on a branch. I sat up, looked around, couldn't see anything at first. It was too dark, and the moon hadn't risen yet. I told myself it was just a deer, maybe a raccoon, but the sound had weight to it, a two-footed weight. It wasn't the soft patter of paws or hooves. It was a step, and then another, crunch, crunch, slow, deliberate. I held my breath and stayed still, eyes scanning the dark. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the footsteps. I didn't want to turn on my flashlight right away. If someone was out there, I didn't want to give away my position. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. Just wind again. I eased back into my sleeping bag and told myself not to be stupid. I was on edge. Maybe too much coffee. Maybe the unfamiliar place. My body was tired, but my brain wouldn't switch off. Then I heard it again. Closer this time. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. I sat up fast, grabbed my flashlight, and turned it on. The beam swept across the grass, the gravestones, the bench, the tree. Nothing. I stood up, turned in a full circle, checking every corner of the hill. Still nothing, but I knew what I heard. That wasn't an animal. I turned off the light and waited again. A long time passed. I kept telling myself if someone was out there, they would have shown themselves, or come closer, but nothing did. I stayed sitting, legs half in the sleeping bag, arms resting on my knees, watching the darkness. Eventually, my head started nodding. Sleep came in fits, 5 minutes at a time, maybe less. I'd jerk awake, check the dark again, then drift. Sometime past midnight, I woke up for real. The sleeping bag felt tighter. Not just tighter, heavier. I looked down and saw that something had been piled on top of it. Rocks. Small, flat rocks. About the size of my palm. Maybe 20 of them, stacked all over my legs and chest. I jolted up and the rocks spilled off. They clattered onto the ground. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, flashlight in hand. My hands shook as I turned it on. Who the hell would do that? I scanned the hill again. Nothing. But I knew someone had been close. Right next to me. Close enough to stack rocks on my body without waking me. I left the sleeping bag and walked the whole hill searching. Every row of graves. Every stone. Behind the tree. Past the fence. Down the slope. Nothing. No sign of movement. No fresh footprints in the dirt, but the ground was too dry to hold prints anyway. Back at my spot, I gathered my stuff quickly. I didn't roll the bag. I just stuffed it into my pack and got ready to leave. But then I noticed something new. Another pile of rocks. On the bench. Same kind, same size, flat, smooth, and stacked in a little pyramid. 12 of them. I hadn't seen them earlier. I would've. That's when I heard the truck door slam. I froze. My truck was parked by the gate, about 100 yards away, down the slope. I couldn't see it from where I was, but I'd know that sound anywhere. I ran. No flashlight now, just the faint light of the moon as it finally rose over the hills. I ran down the slope, feet slipping on the dry grass. My pack bounced against my back, and I nearly fell twice. When I got to the fence, the gate was closed. It had been open before. I pushed through and saw the truck, right where I left it, but the driver's door was open. I crept forward, listening. No sound. I checked the inside. Nothing looked stolen. My phone was still on the seat. My map, my wallet in the glove box, but the driver's seat was wet. Not soaked, but damp, like someone sat there in wet clothes. I closed the door and locked it, got in on the passenger side and slid over, started the engine, and turned the headlights on. The beams lit up the graveyard fence and the road ahead, and something moved just outside the light. I threw it in reverse, spun the truck around, and sped down the gravel road. I didn't stop until I was 20 miles away, parked outside a gas station, wide-eyed and shaking. I sat there until sunrise. I didn't call the cops. What would I tell them? That someone put rocks on my legs while I was asleep? That someone sat in my truck without taking anything? It didn't make sense. And that's what made it worse. The next day, I drove to the next town over and bought a cheap motel room. I locked the door and slept for 14 hours. A week later, I found an article online about Fairbridge. Back in the 1980s, the town had tried to shut the cemetery down. There were rumors about kids going missing up there. Not murdered, just gone. No evidence, just disappearances. The town quietly stopped using the graveyard after that. Nothing official, just whispers. I never went back, never drove near Fairbridge again. But I still think about that night. Whoever or whatever was up on that hill, they didn't want me there. They didn't hurt me, didn't rob me, but they watched. They got close. Close enough to arrange stones on my body like I was already part of that place. And the worst part? I was asleep when they did it. That thought keeps me up sometimes, even now. Not because I'm scared of graveyards, but because I'll never know how long they stood there, looking down at me while I slept, not knowing a thing. And I don't want to know. Not anymore. I was 34 when I went out alone to camp near an old disused quarry in southern Oregon. It was late September 2019, and I'd been feeling overwhelmed by everything: work, bills, family stress. I needed a few days where I didn't have to talk to anyone, just disconnect from the world and feel like a human being again. I'd grown up in Bend, but I'd moved closer to Portland years earlier. Most weekends were spent driving around traffic and breathing in exhaust, and that fall I hit a wall. I packed up my gear, tent, stove, folding chair, journal, dry food, layers of clothes, and drove out on a Thursday morning. The plan was to camp 3 nights near an old rock quarry I'd found on an old forestry map. It hadn't been used since the 70s, and it was at the end of a rough trail, far from where most people camped. The place was about a 5-hour drive from my apartment. The last hour was the worst. Gravel roads with deep ruts, fallen branches, and no signage at all. I had to rely on the GPS and memory. I parked the car behind a thicket of young pines and walked about a mile to the quarry itself. It looked just like the old photos. A wide open pit with steep rock walls. One side filled with stagnant rainwater that had turned a murky green. There were tire tracks from years ago still visible in the packed dirt. No fresh ones. It was dead quiet, with only the faint rustling of dry leaves in the wind. I liked it right away. I set up my tent at the edge of the quarry under some trees, far enough from the drop, but close enough that I could see the rock walls from my sleeping bag. I made some food, scribbled in my journal, and drank cheap whiskey from a metal flask. It got dark fast out there. The moon wasn't out, and once the sun dipped behind the ridge, the whole quarry turned black. I turned off my headlamp and just sat there in the dark for a while, listening. Crickets, wind, that was it. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sharp snapping noise. Something big had stepped on a branch, maybe 20 feet from the tent. I laid still and listened. There was more movement, slow, heavy footsteps. Not like a deer or raccoon, something bipedal. I grabbed the hunting knife I kept in the side pouch of my pack and waited. I didn't move, didn't breathe too loud. The sound kept going for another 10 seconds, then stopped. No more noise, just wind. Eventually, I fell back asleep with the knife in my hand. By morning, I figured it had just been a bear or maybe even my imagination. I made breakfast, wandered around the edges of the quarry, and found an old piece of rusted machinery halfway buried in the dirt. Looked like part of a conveyor belt or engine, but I couldn't tell. I felt fine all day. Peace even. I wrote in my journal for hours and took a nap under the sun. That night was colder. The wind picked up and howled over the edge of the quarry. I built a fire and huddled closer to it than I usually would. I kept glancing toward the trees where I'd heard the footsteps the night before. Nothing looked off, but I couldn't relax. Something felt different, like the air had weight to it. When I turned in for the night, I put the knife beside my sleeping bag again. My body was tired, but my mind wasn't. I laid there awake for an hour, then 2. The trees creaked and moaned in the wind. At some point, I heard movement again. Same as the night before. Crunching steps maybe 10 feet away. I bolted upright, heart hammering. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the sound, but all I saw were tree trunks and brush. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't what I saw, it was what I didn't. A patch of leaves that had been there earlier was now flattened, as if someone had stepped or knelt there. But I didn't see anyone. No sound. Just that spot, clearly disturbed, maybe 15 feet away. I swept the light back and forth, trying to make sense of it. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, I packed up and moved my camp a few hundred feet deeper into the woods, closer to the slope that overlooked the quarry but with thicker cover. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I just needed to reset. I spent the day chopping dead branches and building a better fire pit. I made a small perimeter of stones around my tent. Not for protection, just so I'd hear if anything moved past them. I also noticed something strange. About 50 feet from where I'd slept the previous night, there was a pile of small rocks stacked neatly in a pyramid shape, maybe 2 feet high. I hadn't seen it before. It was too precise to be natural. That night, I didn't make a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I stayed in the tent and read by headlamp until I couldn't keep my eyes open. I drifted off sometime before midnight. What woke me wasn't noise. It was light, a soft glow on the side of the tent. At first, I thought the moon had finally come out, but the light wasn't steady. It flickered. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. Down in the quarry, at the bottom near the edge of the green pool, there was a fire burning. A small one, controlled but clearly lit by someone. I saw a shape standing near it. Not moving, just standing. The figure looked male, average height, arms at his side. I turned off my headlamp immediately and ducked down. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my teeth. I hadn't heard a car. I hadn't seen another human being in 2 full days. There was no reason for someone else to be down there, this far from everything. I waited for half an hour before I peeked again. The fire was still going. The figure was gone. I packed my gear in the dark. Tent, food, pack, everything. Took me an hour. I hiked back to my car without turning on my light, just feeling the trail under my boots. I reached the car by 4 a.m., and even though I was exhausted, I drove until sunrise. No music, just the sound of gravel under the tires. When I finally stopped at a gas station near Grants Pass, I looked at myself in the mirror inside the restroom. I looked like I'd aged 5 years in 3 days. Sunburned, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked. I took a deep breath, splashed cold water on my face, and told myself it was over. But when I got home and unpacked, I found something I didn't put in my bag. A rock, smooth, gray, and about the size of a golf ball, wrapped in a strip of old cloth, tied tight with twine. I didn't touch it at first. I used my pocket knife to unwrap the cloth. The rock had a deep scratch across one side, almost like it had been carved deliberately. I threw it out. I never went back to that part of Oregon. I stopped camping alone altogether. I kept telling myself it could have been a hiker, maybe even some kind of prospector or drifter, but that doesn't explain the fire, or the figure that just stood and watched, or the rock, carefully wrapped and slipped into my pack without me knowing. I told myself I was being dramatic, but I changed the locks on my apartment door the next week. Started sleeping with a baseball bat by the bed. I've tried to forget it, but sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I feel like I'm back there, in the trees, in the dark, watching something I can't see watching me. I was 34 when it happened, back in late September of 2011. I lived in southern Idaho at the time, working as a diesel mechanic in a quiet little town called Mountain Home. I didn't have much going on back then.
No girlfriend, no real obligations.
I just went to work, did my job, came home, and stared at the wall until it was time to sleep. Every now and then, I'd do something to break up the routine. Sometimes it was fishing. Other times, I'd go out into the desert and just walk, letting the silence flatten everything out inside my head. But that September, I wanted trees. Something about the end of summer made me crave being somewhere green and wet. I didn't want to go to the coast. Too many people. I wanted somewhere dense, empty, maybe a little forgotten. I had this old camping book from the 90s with all these backcountry spots nobody talks about anymore. One of them stuck out. A place just outside Oak Ridge, Oregon, near the Willamette National Forest. The book said there used to be an old railroad line that ran through the trees nearby, but the tracks had been pulled decades earlier. All that was left was a flat, cleared path that followed a winding river for miles. The book said you could hike in a few miles, then find all sorts of flat spots to pitch a tent. The map even showed an old service road that paralleled the path for a bit, though it warned the road hadn't been maintained since the early 80s. That sounded perfect. I packed my old blue backpack with my tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, a couple mountain house meals, and a bottle of bourbon I'd been saving. I took the Friday off work, got up before sunrise, and hit the road in my Tacoma. Took me around 10 hours to get there. The last stretch was slow, winding up into the mountains past thick walls of fir trees. I stopped at a gas station near West Fir to fill up and ask for directions, just to double-check I was heading the right way. The old guy behind the counter looked like he'd been rooted there for the last 50 years, but he just nodded and said the area I was heading into hadn't seen many visitors in years. Forest swallowed most of the old road, he said. But if you find it, you'll be alone. That's what I wanted. I drove another 45 minutes past Oak Ridge, following a thin blacktop road that curved around the river. Eventually, I hit a locked Forest Service gate, which I was expecting. I parked off to the side and strapped on my pack. I had planned to hike in 5 miles and camp near where the river and the old railroad path met again, a kind of bend the map showed. It was isolated enough to be peaceful, but close enough to the old path that I wouldn't get totally turned around. The hike in was quiet. Too quiet, actually. I've camped in a lot of places over the years, and I'm used to silence. but this felt like the air had been turned off.
No birds.
No wind. Even the river felt muffled. I kept telling myself it was just my ears adjusting, or that maybe the local wildlife was less active in the fall. But still, I found myself glancing over my shoulder every so often. Not because I heard something, because I didn't. It took me a little over 2 hours to reach the spot I'd picked. It was gorgeous. Thick ferns covering the ground, massive trees with mossy trunks, and that slow-moving river curving around like a big mirror. I found a flat area with soft ground and a clear view of the water. I pitched my tent, got a small fire going with a portable pit I'd brought, then boiled some water for dinner. By the time the sun dropped behind the trees, I had everything set up. My gear was squared away, the fire was crackling, and I'd already had 2 sips of the bourbon. I leaned back against a fallen log, wrapped in a flannel shirt, and just listened. Still no birds, still no wind, just the river. I slept okay that first night. I woke up twice. Once because I thought I heard something stepping in the brush nearby, and once because I swore I heard a metallic clang, like a piece of steel hitting something hollow. But when I sat up and unzipped the tent, there was nothing, just black woods and silence. I chalked it up to the sound of trees creaking or maybe something falling down the slope into the river. The next day, I decided to explore a little. I walked along the edge of the river and found what was left of the railroad path. It was still visible, a flat, overgrown strip of land that cut straight through the trees like someone had drawn a line in the forest. You could tell it hadn't been used in decades. Grass and saplings had overtaken it, and the gravel was scattered. But every now and then, I'd find an old railroad tie, half buried and cracked. I followed the path for maybe a mile before I found something strange. It was an old wooden post with a rusted metal plate nailed to it. There were no markings on the plate, just a big dent in the center like someone had hit it hard with something. Around the post, the ground was churned up, not like animals digging, more like someone had been pacing in circles. There were these faint trails of pressed down ferns and broken sticks radiating out in different directions. It gave me a weird feeling in my stomach. Not quite fear, more like being watched in a store you don't belong in. I didn't stick around long. I headed back to camp and tried to shake it off. That night is when things started getting worse. I fell asleep sometime after 10, wrapped up in my bag with the fire burned down to glowing coals. Sometime after midnight, I woke up in a sweat. I had that feeling like I was being stared at, like I had when I found the post earlier. I sat up, trying to hear if something was outside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, just listened. That's when I heard it. A dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across gravel. Slow, deliberate, not an animal. I froze in place, staring at the ceiling of the tent, trying to keep my breathing quiet. The sound kept going, then stopped, then started again. Closer. I reached for the knife I kept under my sleeping pad and waited. Nothing happened. I stayed like that for over an hour. Eventually, I passed out again, still gripping the handle. When I woke up the next morning, everything looked normal. No tracks, no damage to my gear, nothing missing. Just that same silence and the same empty forest. But I knew what I'd heard. That day, I debated packing up and heading out early, but something in me didn't want to give up just yet. I told myself maybe it was a tree branch falling or some kind of animal messing around near the old rail path. I tried to distract myself by going further down the river, collecting wood and skipping rocks, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time I turned around, I expected to see something, or someone. At dusk, I lit the fire early and made dinner. I kept checking the trees around camp, shining my flashlight into the brush even though I knew that wasn't smart. You don't want to show fear out there. Predators, human or animal, can sense it. That night, I barely slept. Sometime around 3 a.m., I heard something again. This time, it wasn't dragging. It was footsteps, not fast, Not running, but steady, crunching lightly over the forest floor. One step every couple seconds, coming from the old rail path. I didn't move. I listened as they got closer, then stopped, then closer again, then silence. I stayed frozen, the knife pressed to my chest under the sleeping bag. I must have stayed like that for 2 hours before the birds finally started singing again. That was the first time I'd heard them since I got there. In the morning, I unzipped the tent and looked around. Still no tracks, still no broken branches. But the fire pit I dug out had been filled back in, like someone had come through in the night and scooped all the cold ash and rocks back into the hole. That was it. I packed up in 15 minutes and got the hell out of there. I didn't eat. I didn't drink water. I just walked, fast and quiet, back the way I came. On the way back, I passed the wooden post again. This time, there was something sitting at the base. A shoe. Just one. Old, muddy, ripped open along the side. I didn't stop to look closer. I reached the truck just before noon. I tossed everything in the back and drove until I hit the highway. I didn't stop until I reached Bend. I never went back. I didn't tell anyone the full story either. I made up some excuse about rain and gear trouble when my coworkers asked why I came back early. But the truth is, I don't know what I heard or who might have been out there. All I know is that place wasn't abandoned. Not really. Someone was still walking that path. Someone who didn't want to be found. And maybe someone who didn't want me to leave. But I did. And I never set foot near Oak Ridge again.